Hello, and welcome to Day by Day True Crime Stories, the podcast where we explore a different crime or justice milestone from this day in history. I'm your host, Kona Gallagher, and today is March 14th. On this day in 1999, the University of Texas at Austin was on spring break. Just hearing those words, spring break, brings up images of sun, sand, and parties. It's supposed to be a time for college students to let loose and escape the stress of school. But for one student, what should have been a fun trip turned into a nightmare. 21-year-old Mark Kilroy vanished while on vacation in Matamoros, Mexico, just across the border from Brownsville, Texas. At first, it just seemed like any other missing person case. Maybe it was just a college student who had too much to drink and had gotten lost. But as the search for Mark continued, the story took a horrifying turn. Authorities soon uncovered something out of a horror movie. A drug cartel cult practicing human sacrifice. And Mark Kilroy wasn't just another missing tourist. He had been chosen for something far more sinister. Today, we're diving into the chilling case of Mark Kilroy, the college student whose fate exposed one of the most terrifying cults in modern history. Let's get started. Mark Kilroy was a pre-med student at the University of Texas, Austin. He was athletic, intelligent, and well-liked with dreams of becoming a doctor. Like thousands of other college students, he and his three best friends packed their bags for spring break, heading to South Padre Island, Texas, one of the biggest party spots in the country. For a few days, it was everything they had imagined. Beaches, bars, and freedom. But on March 13th, they decided to do something a little different. That night, they crossed the border into Matamoros, Mexico, a city known for its clubs and cheap drinks. They spent the evening bar hopping and just having fun like normal college kids. But as the night came to an end and they headed back to the U.S., something went terribly wrong. Somewhere between 1:30 and 2 a.m. on March 14th, Mark suddenly disappeared. One minute, he was walking with his friends down the bridge leading back to Brownsville. The next, he was gone. His friends frantically searched the crowded streets, calling his names and checking nearby bars, but there was no sight of Mark. The next morning, they reported him missing. At first, police thought it was just a case of a drunk college kid wandering off. But Mark's parents knew their son. They knew he wasn't the type who would just disappear. What they didn't know is that Mark Kilroy had been abducted. For weeks, investigators searched Matamoros, talking to locals, bar owners, and tourists, but no real leads emerged. Then in April, everything changed. Mexican authorities were investigating a drug smuggling operation when they arrested a man named Serafin Hernandez Garcia at a ranch just outside Matamoros. While searching the property, officers found something that was deeply disturbing. They saw strange altars, scattered bones, and ritualistic objects. And then they found a mass grave. Among the remains in the grave was Mark Kilroy's body. His skull had been split open, and his remains had been mutilated in what could only be described as a ritual sacrifice. But why? The answer lay in the man running the ranch, a man named Adolfo Constanzo, a self-proclaimed witch doctor who controlled both a drug empire and a death cult. To understand the horror of what happened to Mark Kilroy and how this is actually somehow a real story, we have to talk about Adolfo Constanzo, the man behind the cult. Adolfo Constanzo was born in 1962 in Miami, Florida, and raised in Santeria and Palo Mayombe, religions with African and Caribbean roots. But, unlike most followers of these religions, he twisted these practices into something violent and sadistic. In the 1980s, he moved to Mexico and reinvented himself as a powerful witch doctor, catering to drug lords and cartels. He promised them protection from law enforcement through rituals and sacrifices. At first, he sacrificed animals, but soon that wasn't enough. By 1988, Costanzo and his cult, known as Los Narcosatanicos, or the Narco-Satanists, had moved on to human sacrifices. Their victims were generally rival drug traffickers and police informants, but sometimes random people who simply crossed their path, like Mark Kilroy, also fell into their clutches. Mark Kilroy, of course, wasn't a police informant or a rival drug trafficker. The night he was taken, he was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. As he and his friends walked toward the border, a group of men working for Costanzo spotted him. They lured him into a van at gunpoint and drove him to the remote ranch. For hours, Mark was held captive. And then the unthinkable happened. Investigators later revealed that he had been brutally tortured before being killed with a machete. His brain was removed and placed in a cauldron used in rituals. The cult believed that by sacrificing Mark, they were gaining supernatural protection for their drug business. After finding Mark's remains, authorities launched a manhunt for Adolfo Costanzo and his followers. On May 6, 1989, police tracked him to an apartment in Mexico City. Surrounded and desperate, Costanzo ordered one of his followers to shoot him before he could be captured. His right-hand man, Martin Quintana, was also killed. Other cult members, including Sarah Aldrete, were arrested. In 1994, she and several others were sentenced to decades in prison for their involvement in Mark Kilroy's murder. Mark's murder shocked the world and led to real changes. His parents founded the Mark Kilroy Foundation, whose mission is to unite youth, adults, and communities against illegal drugs through anti-drug education and scholarships. The case also led to stricter border security measures and better cooperation between U.S. and Mexican law enforcement. More than 35 years later, Mark Kilroy's story remains a terrifying reminder that sometimes real-life horror stories can happen in the most unexpected places. Thank you for joining me on today's episode of Day by Day True Crime Stories. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. And be sure to join me tomorrow as we explore another significant event in true crime history. Until then, stay safe and remember that behind every headline is a life worth remembering. Day by Day, True Crime Stories is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!